Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us for our Q&A on tips for deciding about retirement village living. Many of you are just joining as I do this introduction. So today's Q&A is being recorded and a link will be emailed out to everyone who registers. I'm Brett Osmond, the editor of Compass, and this Q&A is brought to you by Compass.info and Elder Abuse Action Australia, also known as EAAA. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the many lands on which we work and pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past and present. So, tips for deciding about retirement village living. Where do we begin? Buying into a retirement village is not only a personal decision with implications on how and where a person lives, but also a financial one. So understanding your options is really important. I'm pleased to have three experts joining us today to help answer your questions about this major life decision. And while I introduce our speakers, I wanted to ask everybody to start sending in your questions via the Q&A. We will endeavour to get to as many questions as we can during today's session. Any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up after today's Q&A. Now, we always welcome a diverse panel of experts onto Compass, and we really are very grateful for the time and expertise our panellists volunteer to be part of our sessions. Today, we've got representatives from Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. Whilst we would have, loved to have had panellists from across the country, that was not possible in this instance. So if we can't answer a specific question about a jurisdiction like Western Australia or South Australia, we will come back to you. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Sharon Carthew. Sharon is a lawyer at Caxton Legal Centre in Brisbane. Caxton's provides free legal advice across all of Queensland for people either living in over 50s residential parks or retirement villages, or considering moving into these types of communities. Sharon also presents free legal seminars for groups interested in the legislative rights of living in these communities. So welcome, and thank you, Sharon, for joining us today. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to Shane McGrath. Shane is the Senior Tenancy and Retirement Worker at Housing for the Aged Action Group, a community-based organisation in Victoria that specialises in the housing needs of older people. The Tenancy and Retirement team provides advice. They also provide advocacy to help older people assert their rights across a range of housing types, residential retirement villages and residential parks. I also want to extend a welcome to William Maynard. And William, welcome. William is a solicitor at Seniors Rights Service. Since January 2022, he has specialised in retirement village and aged care law. During that time, William has given many talks to community groups throughout New South Wales. William joined Seniors Rights Service after a long legal career in private practice and the public service, and has worked across a wide range of legal areas. So we're very happy to have everybody here today. And firstly, I'd like to kick off with a question to you, Sharon. Retirement villages are not all the same. Some are not-for-profit and they can vary widely with regards fees. What are the various types of retirement village setups or models that are commonly found in Australia?
Well, as a lawyer in Queensland, I will speak for what we have here in Queensland. So regardless of who the operator is or owner of the retirement village, be it not-for-profit or some other corporation, there's a number of legal rights you have in terms of the type of setup or the structure that that village will have. So the most common one is what's called a leasehold, where you lease the right to reside in the accommodation unit. And that lease actually has additional protections because it's usually registered on the land title for the village. And that means anybody buying that village takes on that lease that you have. So there's no end to your lease. Then the other type is what's known as a license, a loan or license, and that's a similar sort of thing. It's a right to reside in the village. However, it's not registered on title, but it should be protected under retirement village legislation in a person's state. It is in Queensland. And then there's freehold, which is not that common, but still exists. And that's where you buy the unit in the retirement village. So you hold the title for the unit, which protects your tenure. The length of stay that you have is up to you. And but it comes with other complexities as well, in that you're involved in body corp and other areas that you wouldn't be dealing with the other forms. And then there is also, it's not very common, I don't come across it very much, but when you're a shareholder of the company that owns the village, you're entitled to live in the village as well. So it's important. This is kind of one of the reasons we say get legal advice. Find out what the structure is for your village. It'll impact costs and everything going forward.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sharon. Now, this is probably a question to all three of you. Who regulates the retirement villages in Australia? William?
In New South Wales, I would say Fair Trading is the regulatory body.
Yep. And Sharon, in Queensland?
We have the Retirement Villages Act, 1999. In Queensland, and then for residential parks, we have the Manufactured Homes Residential Parks Act for Queensland, and they're the bodies that those communities come under.
Wonderful. And Shane, in Victoria?
So in Victoria, Consumer Affairs Victoria is the agency that regulates retirement villages, and retirement village disputes can be heard at VCAT's, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal's civil claims list.
So I've seen we've got one question that's come in from Rebecca. At what point should you seek legal advice about buying into a retirement village, such as the conveyancing?
That's a favourite of mine.
Yep.
Because when you've gone through all the process of going through this is the lifestyle that you want, because it is a lifestyle choice, then and you have your disclosure documents and the contract, that's when you need the lawyer. You don't want to sign anything without having a private lawyer look through it. We're a community law firm. We advise people on the process, so we can go through what documents you need, what questions you need to ask, and then we can't go through those before someone goes in, because our priorities have to be up when somebody's in there, in the village. So we recommend as early as you have those documents, and not just legal advice, but financial advice as well for retirement villages.
Yeah. And what are a person's rights inside a retirement village, and what governs how the village treats them? Is that something, Shane, you might be able to answer?
Yeah, I mean, in Victoria, people's rights are governed to an extent by the Retirement Villages Act, which is currently under review by the Victorian government, or there's some amendments before Parliament. But in most cases, most of a person's rights in a Victorian retirement village are going to come from the agreement or agreements that they've signed with the retirement village. So it's not, we also work with residential tenancies, and there it's much more straightforward that your rights are derived from the law. The law says, this person does the repairs, this person owes this money. It's not like that for retirement villages. It's very much a case of those rights and obligations coming from the agreement itself, which is why, exactly as Sharon said, it's really important to get advice about those agreements specifically.
Is there anything, William, you'd like to add to that?
No, just to agree. I would use the term security of tenure, which we tell clients they do have in a retirement village security of tenure. In that way, it's different to a lease, a residential lease, which some people in a retirement village will be under. But in broad terms, people in retirement villages do have a security of tenure, except for certain circumstances, which in New South Wales case is set out in the Retirement Villages Act. And I could talk about it, or we could advise about it in Seniors' Rights Service if people have questions. But
Yeah.
that's a useful term, I think, security of tenure.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Now
just-
we've got a call. Sorry, Sharon, over
I
to
was
you.
just going to say, in the Retirement Village Act in Queensland, there actually are obligations and behavioural standards that are required, and that coupled with the contract, which will give details on more the residents' obligations as well. So in the Act, it's things like the retirement villages not to interfere with their peace, privacy and comfort, nor allow others to do so. They're to create an environment where they're free from harassment or intimidation, and requirements like when a resident sends them a letter requesting something, suggesting something, or maintenance issue, that the village has to respond within 21 days. So some of those rights are established in the Act, and then they are put into the contract with other obligations, especially in terms of what the resident living in the unit is responsible for replacing or repairing, even though they don't own the unit. There is sometimes things like hot water services or air conditioners that the village will require them to replace, even though it's a capital item.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Now, I see we've got a comment here from Roger, who's the VP of New South Wales Retirement Village Residents Association. And he's just mentioned that they've just produced 2 videos on factors to consider before moving into a leasehold retirement village. And they're available on the New South Wales Retirement Village Residents Association website. So thank you, Roger. I've got another question here. How can people get a full and complete picture of what they're actually signing up for? Because there are, people often mention there can be hidden fees. And so what's the best way to go about getting a complete picture of what, people are actually signing up for when they, sign a contract to enter a retirement village? Is it literally sitting down with an independent legal and financial expert, or are there other factors that can come into play? William, over to you.
Thank you. Yes. In New South Wales, again, everything I won't constantly preface with that, but that's obviously my experience. There are 2 important documents. The contract, which my colleagues have already discussed, that you must read the contract and really ideally should get advice on the contract. It's disappointing how many people in my client experience not only haven't got prior advice on the contract, but sometimes haven't even read the contract. And secondly, there's a document in New South Wales called the disclosure statement. And some of the factors, Brett, which might be relevant and will be in the disclosure statement is where's the nearest hospital? Where's the nearest shopping centre? And also items about life in the village, whether there's a cafe, whether there's a swimming pool. Of course, you should see the village before you sign up, but still the disclosure statement is part of your legal arrangement with the operator. And if you get the disclosure statement and attach it to the contract and keep both of them where you know where they are, then you have some protection to understand not only the legal terms between you and the operator, but also the environment, both within the village and outside the village that you're moving into.
Thank you. Moving on to fees, which I think will be, a rich area. A lot of questions coming in already about fees. What are some of the types of fees that people can expect as part of a contract with a retirement village operator? Sharon?
Well, you have the ingoing contribution, which is initial fee, but surrounding that, there is sometimes some villages require you to then pay for the legal preparation of the documents as well. So you have a rather large ingoing contribution, which is why I recommend people get legal advice for the few $100s for the private lawyer to protect, the 100,000s. It's not an investment. It's not going to generate wealth for you. So there's the ingoing contribution, which will be large. There is then general services charges or general services fund, which in Queensland is required under legislation, plus a maintenance reserve fund that residents pay into. There's a third fund that's compulsory, but residents don't pay into that, and that's the capital items replacement fund. That's the village's responsibility. Now, the general services fund is a fund they pay into for maintaining the gardens and other areas of the village, the administration, that sort of thing. The maintenance reserve fund, that focuses on maintaining things that are available in the village that are capital items, but it's just the maintenance, not replacement of. That's up to the village. Then in retirement villages, some offer meals. So there'll be maybe an additional contract you'll go into for a meal service. Sometimes it's compulsory. It's part of the package that you signed up for. And then there'll be other personal services that the village might be able to provide, and there'll be an additional cost for that, such as cleaning, laundry, all those sorts of things. People have to consider contents insurance for what's inside the unit. And then depending on their contracts, a lot of things we have to say, go back to a contract, whether there's telephone, whether it's up to them for the telephone expenses and things like that. So there's some of the costs.
Now, Shane, you're also working with a lot of people. People often talk about hidden fees. What types of fees might seemingly be hidden at first glance?
So I think that the extent to which fees are hidden is maybe a bit overstated in some of the discussion. The way that we sort of break this down for people in broad terms is that there's three kinds of fees that you need to understand before you move into a retirement village. That's your upfront fees, your ongoing fees, and your exit fees. So upfront fees are in Victoria mainly an ingoing contribution, as Sharon was talking about. There are not-for-profit retirement villages that offer accommodation either with a means-tested ingoing that's more affordable, or in some cases have no ingoing contribution for some residents. So there's not always an upfront cost, but generally it's true that there is. Then you're going to be paying your ongoing charges, which in the main is going to be a sort of monthly fee akin to rent called a maintenance charge or a service charge or something like that. And that covers the operating expenses of the village. And then a lot of the charges that people do have concerns about are the exit fees. So often there's a deferred management fee, which is where the village is generating most of its profit. And that's most commonly paid. Again, I keep saying, I feel like I keep hedging my answers because there's no like universal rules about how these things work. It is different from village to village, but broadly, the deferred management fee is going to be paid as a percentage of the price that the next occupant of your unit pays to move in there. So something like a sale price, even if you don't actually own the dwelling. That will generally accrue as a percentage of the sale price per year that you live there, up until a certain maximum. So it might be something along the lines of 3% per year for the first 10 years. And then once it hits 30% of the sale price, it won't increase any further.
Right.
Sorry, I know you said 2 minutes. I'll cut this off quick, but there are other costs associated with leaving. It's very common that residents are going to be liable to fully refurbish and renovate the unit before they resell it, relet it. So there can be a whole bundle of costs around leaving a retirement village as well that people should make sure that they understand.
Yeah. William, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I'd like to echo that and say we're not giving financial advice, but people often seem to not understand that whatever you paid to come in, you will get significantly less when you leave. Yeah. And of course, what's also important in that regard is that the longer you stay, the more the exit fees, as Shane said, are amortised, so that from your point of view, as a resident, it's better to stay in the village for 15 years than 3 or 4 or 5 years. But from the operator's point of view, it could be better to only have you stay 5 years because the exit fee will reach a maximum. And like Shane said, often it's after 5 or 6 years. That has led to some suggestions that operators may be trying to encourage older residents to move in, and there's issues there. May I say, Brett, there is an interesting question there that's being asked by Jane
Yes, I was
about
just going to go to
exit.
that. Yes.
Yes, so thank you.
Hmm.
Happy.
Yeah, yeah. So Jane has mentioned, her comment is, it would seem that retirement villages hold older people to ransom. Should the owner-occupier need to move out unexpectedly to an aged care facility? As the retirement village is going to get their money regardless of how quickly the property is sold, this seems very unfair. What would you suggest as options to hurry along the retirement village to sell the property in a timely fashion and free up the some money to help pay for aged care home fees? Yeah, it's a really good question. William?
Yes, I would like to answer that from a New South Wales context. The probably, I think, the most common place that a person's going to go from a retirement village is to an aged care facility, which usually requires a significant deposit, refundable accommodation deposit, we call it in New South Wales. Now, I would say, Jane, there's two ways in which the New South Wales government has tried to protect residents. First of all, most people are living under a licence arrangement and they need to get their exit monies often to pay for the aged care refundable accommodation deposit. So the New South Wales government said that if the retirement village is in an urban area, then it must pay the exit amount within 6 months. If it's in a rural area, it will be able to pay it up to a year. But by that time, they have to have paid out the money, because then at least the person knows there is a time in which they're going to get the money. And the other provision in the Retirement Villages Act New South Wales is that you can ask the operator to pay ahead of time, ahead of the sale, funds into the aged care facility to help you as a resident now pay part or all of the RAD. Thank you.
Great, great.
Bit
Sharon,
different in
Sharon?
Queensland. Oh,
Yep.
sorry. I think
Over
it's a
to you,
little bit
Sharon.
different in Queensland in that although the legislation doesn't regulate how much the exit fees are going to be and how they come up with the numbers, it does require a statement about when to receive that exit fee. And because this is all in the contract right from the start, it's very, very important that people know that they don't feel that this has been hidden from them, that they know up front and not to sign it if they're not happy with that. But generally, there is a problem. There's a huge gap between when they exit the village and when they get what's called their exit entitlement, which is what's left over after they take all those fees and other charges. And so even so with the legislation, they've got 14 days to pay that after the sale or after a person has moved into that unit, or if there's a specific time frame in the contract that they've made. But there's unfortunately we don't have they can pay in advance in the legislation. So there often is a gap between them having the funds and moving into aged care and being in the retirement village. So it's important that they are aware of that and plan for that if they're still going to proceed and go into the contract. But that is a difficult issue and a problem that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. Shane?
In Victoria, somewhat similar to what William said, there are provisions that require a retirement village in a lot of cases to advance some of the exit entitlement to cover aged care costs. That will depend on the structure of the village and elements of the contract and when it's signed and things like that. So again, important to get advice. I do think, William is no doubt correct that it's the most common place for people to move when they leave a retirement village. But I do think people should give some thought to whether they would be able to leave the village if they decided that's what they want to do. What we see in our service is, I think, the most common reason that people are calling us is because they moved into a retirement village. They were very happy there for 5, 10 years, maybe longer. And there's some change in management and they don't like it anymore and they're not in a position to leave. So, I mean, that is just a reality of the sector. But giving some thought to what you do if the conditions change so that you no longer wanted to live there or were no longer able to live there, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, good advice. Thanks, Shane. We've got a great question here from Jennifer. Jennifer is an aged care and seniors living financial advisor. and has a current client with a psych condition, wanting to move into a retirement village unit. Jennifer's concerned that she will be asked to leave if a client will be asked to leave if she causes nuisance or is deemed to be incapable of living independently. The question is, can you explain how these issues are dealt with from a legal perspective?
Is this a retirement village or an aged care facility?
This is a retirement village unit that the person is moving into, the client,
Right.
who has a psych condition. And so the question is, yeah, how are issues around nuisance, potential perceived nuisance or causes of nuisance, or, topics around being incapable of living independently dealt with from a legal perspective? Sharon?
Oh, it doesn't have to be me. I was just clarifying because I'm not familiar with aged care legislation, so that's outside of my scope. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't.
No, all good.
stepping on
William, is
someone's
that
toes.
something that you might be able to answer? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Did you say William or Shane?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I would like to speak to that. Thank you, because this is a very good question to have. The fact that the person has a psychological condition shouldn't prevent them living in a retirement village subject to their own doctor's advice. But there is protection, and I assume Australia-wide. Causing a nuisance, as Jennifer has put it, is not enough to demand that you leave the village. It has to be a serious, in our state, the tribunal, NCAT, has found there has to be a serious ongoing problem with conduct. It doesn't matter if the person, may I say, didn't take their medication and has one day when they abuse people. That doesn't mean they can be forced out of the village. You would need a serious pattern of misconduct. At the same time, you have to be able to live independently to live in a retirement village. So clients need to take that into account. If you have physical or psychological conditions which mean you can't live an independent life, then probably a retirement village is not for you.
Yeah, okay, helpful. We've got a different type of question from Rebecca. How do you see the tiny homes movement, which has its own complexities, potentially changing the retirement village climate, if at all? And I don't know whether this moves into an area of where tiny homes are kind of similar to granny flats. But yeah, I don't know if any of you have any comment or have had any experience with tiny homes and their impact on that retirement village landscape, or not at all, potentially.
I mean, to me, tiny home is basically a euphemism for a caravan or what we'd call a part for a unit.
Yep.
It isn't particularly a distinct type of housing. It's more of a marketing term. So, we're not really talking about residential parks or caravan parks today, but those are other kinds of retirement housing that have both overlaps and differences from retirement villages. I haven't really seen anything in the tiny homes movement that makes me think it's going to make a big change in the retirement village or retirement housing spaces.
Great. Kathy asks the question, do potential village folk really understand the implications of legal language within the fine print of a contract? So I guess that opens up the issue of what services might be available for people who, English is not a first language and who might find legal contracts challenging. And also those who may have a cognitive condition that makes it difficult to understand. I mean, they can be challenging at the best of times. Are there any services in particular to support people in this area? William, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I must say, with New South Wales, I will be recommending, obviously, where I work, Seniors Rights Service. First of all, we can give a telephone advice and we can have a contract sent to us before the advice, and we do have an interpreter service, which would mean that we could give the advice through the interpreter in a language other than English. We also have advocates who they're more focused on aged care, but in certain circumstances perhaps could assist by a physical visit to the person. And there's also, you already said, Brett, that we had information from the Retirement Villages Residents Association. That's a New South Wales organisation, a volunteer organisation of residents, which does have a variety of services to assist people in considering retirement village living.
Great, thank you. There's a question here from Roger at the New South Wales Retirement Village Residential Association that says people do not always leave with less than they paid for. Capital gains need to be considered. Yeah, I mean, is that a common situation, or how do people deal with the potential of capital gains in this scenario?
The capital gains is a bit different from a true property ownership, in that if they have, I'll just give you an example of some of the sums. So let's, for argument's sake, keep it simple. So if they paid 400,000 as an ingoing contribution, and in Queensland, sometimes exit fees are up to 47% of that ingoing contribution. So let's say round it up to 50. So they've already 200,000 is gone. And then from that 200,000 remaining, there'll be other charges that will continue to be paid, even though they've left the village in Queensland, until the right to reside's been sold. And then they'll be taken from that remaining 200,000. So the capital gains, again, it'll be contractual, whether the village has agreed to give them 100% or whether it's going to be shared with the village. And if it's added before they take the exit fees. So I've not seen recently anybody that where the capital gains compensated them for the exit fee, or they went out with, more than what they came in with. So,
right.
Because there's no land as part of that contract. It's at least the right to reside. So someone's purchasing a right to reside in the unit.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Other people's experience, yeah.
Yeah. William, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to speak to that and to add on to what Sharon's saying, because the question is a fair one, but it's only a minority of people who are going to get more money going out than they paid going in. People should realise that's a small number of people. In New South Wales, it means that you paid more money up front to get a registered lease, which will give you 50% or 100% usually of capital gain. And in some cases, the capital gain can be significant. But for most people, many people are shocked by the difference between what they paid going in and what they're going to get going out. And so they have to be aware that that's a sort of rent payment, if you like. And you have to figure out, look, if I've spent 5 years here and then I need to move to less independent living, what's it really cost me in terms of what I pay up front, what's subtracted in the exit fees, and also what we call the recurrent charges, which I'm sure applies to all Australian villages, that you pay a monthly amount or fortnightly amount, and you have to factor that in, as well as the exit fee. So you understand that if you're only going to be there 5 years, and you don't know necessarily, it's a significant rent, if you like.
Yeah. And another way of looking at it too is if somebody either leaves or passes away, their family is responsible for selling that right to reside. That falls on them. And if they've been in that village 20 years, then you've got to look at that attraction of that village compared to a brand new village to attract people who would pay more. So there are other considerations as well. So it's really a lifestyle choice, and it's one people need to think about, because these days you can remain in your own home and get a lot of assistance with daily living skills that you might need help with, as opposed to, 10, 20, 30 years ago when a retirement village was where you got that. So,
yeah. We've got a question here from Helen. Helen says that she's heard that owners have no control of selling their property. So by virtue of that, no control over selling for the best price. It doesn't sound very competitive, Helen says. Can you discuss, she's asked us, can we discuss what control a resident has in selling their property. And obviously, the situation may be that the selling of the property is done by potentially other people if the
What,
original owner is not
what state has that
alive.
question come from? Because that'll impact that answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Helen, if you're able to let us know what state. So we'll let Helen let us know what state that she's in. We might go on to another question. There can be some other. How do people get a full picture of the rules that might be applied? For instance, one of the questions we have is, can people have guests stay over? And if they do have guests stay over, is there a limit to how long guests can stay over? Is it just, a night or two? Could they have a guest stay for an extended period of time? How is that kind of dealt with? Is that in the contract? Shane, are you able
Right.
to?
Yeah, I mean, almost all retirement villages are going to have rules about guests and about, pets and a range of other issues about sort of everyday life. Um, those rules should be available. They will form part of the contract that a person signs, and they should be available, for someone who's considering moving into a retirement village to have a look at. It does vary quite a lot. I don't think I know of any retirement villages that flatly ban guests, but certainly there are many where there's a limit on how long guests can stay, in some cases on the ages of guests that are allowed to stay overnight, which can be very restrictive depending on the specific guests that you might be considering having.
Yep.
So yeah, I think guests is a really great question, like knowing what the rules in your particular village are about guests can be really important.
Now, Helen has jumped in and said, could the answer cover Queensland and Victoria about the selling? How much control have you got? So, Shane, are you able to
Sure.
to
So I guess it's complicated. I'm thinking about what I would say about this in my 2 minutes. In Victoria, a retirement village can require a resident to sell through them, but if they do that, they have to, like, there's a cap on how long they can make you wait for your exit entitlement and how long you have to continue paying your recurrent fees. So generally, retirement villages will allow residents to sell through a real estate agent or to sell otherwise than through the village itself. There's a practical problem, though, that many real estate agents don't have any experience or capacity to sell a retirement village unit. So often they'll just decline, or they won't be best placed to sell it quickly and for the best value. In terms of the best price, most of the time, in my experience, the village is going to sell it for the highest price that possible because they get a huge chunk of the sale price. They want to maximize that return. So they're more likely to be insisting on a high price and making the resident bear the cost of renovations that will support the high price than charging something that's less than what the market would allow.
Thank you, Shane. And Sharon in Queensland?
In Queensland, the Retirement Village Act has a structure in place that they need to follow. So if when they have notified the village that they're leaving, then the village and the resident need to agree on what they're going to price the right to reside for that unit. And if they can't come to an agreement, the Act instructs them that they need to get a valuation, and that valuation of the property will be the selling price. Then there is time frames. If it hasn't sold within 3 months, it can go out to a real estate agent, and then up to 18 months, if it hasn't sold, the village is required to pay out their exit entitlement, or some villages choose to buy back the unit themselves. And then other villages don't have that system at all, where they'll actually buy it back from the resident and give them their exit entitlement, and then they often refurbish it and sell it. But there are protections in the Act in terms of the process that they come to agreement on the price, so that it isn't overpriced. And if they can't come to an agreement, then they need to pay for a valuation, and it'll go on sale for that price.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sharon. We've got an interesting question here from Charlotte. Charlotte, who has indicated that she's a lawyer. She's noticed manufactured home villages in New South Wales insisting on probate when the first person of a couple dies, regardless that the home was owned jointly with their spouse. This seems unfair and an added impost on poorer people. What do you think? William?
Yes, thank you. This is referring to a land lease village, which is different to a retirement village, because in a land lease village, you own the home and the operator owns the land. And there are different laws. There's a different act, at least in New South Wales, for that circumstance. Yes, the question seems a fair one. I mean, I'm not sure quite what the demand is, but is someone remaining in the home to demand probate in the sense of control of the estate, that would be extraordinary. If that's what the question means, that would seem quite unfair, and often would be, presumably, if the deceased person had a will, that would set out who the executor was. So certainly that seems to flag a good issue. Perhaps if it's a New South Wales issue, it seems rights, we could advise on land lease questions separately to retirement villages.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here from June in Tasmania. How about Tasmania? Which really prompts me to mention that today's Q&A is the follow-on from a terrific and very informative article that's on Compass called Tips for Deciding About Retirement Village Living. It's on our website, Compass.info, in our future planning section. And it has information on lots of things to consider about deciding about retirement village, plus where to go for more information in each state and territory in Australia. So, June, while we don't have an expert from Tasmania today, you will find really helpful information in that article and places to go in Tasmania to get more advice. Now, I wanted to kind of change the kind of focus of questions, because moving into a retirement village, and I realise we've got two lawyers with us today, but it's not all about a financial decision. It's a lifestyle decision as well. And one of the things that our article covers, and it was mentioned to us by Caxton's Legal Centre in Queensland, is to highlight the fact that when you move into a retirement village, there are often established relationships between residents, and that actually it can be difficult for some people to break into or form relationships where established groups are already in place. They may actually think they're moving into a kind of ready-made friendship group, but can sometimes find the experience isolating and lonely. Is this something, Shane, that you have heard about or get feedback on from people in Victoria?
I don't think directly that question. Certainly, the people who enjoy living in retirement villages appreciate the community aspect. There's lots of older people who don't particularly want to live in a tight-knit community, and a retirement village is going to be less suitable for them. It's true that cliques can arise in a retirement village like any other, community or neighborhood. So yeah, I don't think I could speak any more directly to that question.
Yeah, I guess that's human nature in some senses. I guess one of the things people can do is get on committees or join groups. So that leads me to another question about residents' committees and who can be involved in those. Williams, do you?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Brett. Yes, well, in New South Wales, residents are the ones who can be involved in committees, and it's important to say that because sometimes management tries to have someone on the committee. But the whole point of the committee is that it should be representing the residents. But at the same time, what you just said, I must say, residents' committees seem to be the focus of a good deal of interpersonal disputes within the village. People feel that the committee is dictating to them, which it can't do legally, but they do feel it personally, or that they're left out of the committee and they want to be on the committee. So it's a good thing to have a residents' committee in general, but be aware that it's part of village living to have different groups within the village. And are you comfortable with that? To follow on also from something that Shane said about the rules, I mean, people have to realize that you're not entirely independent. If you want to have a pet and the rules say you can't have a pet, well, then you're not going to have a pet. And if you want to change the rules, you'll have to get the help of other residents to do so. So there are limitations on your life in a retirement village, which for many people are offset by the camaraderie, which hopefully is there, by the fact that they no longer have to mow their own lawn, the community hall, all the other aspects of life there. People have to think about the pluses and minuses of what is not fully independent living in the sense of I run my own show.
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense. We've got a question here from Kathy. Do many villages offer transition to residential care services as a priority within contracts? Is that something that is common?
Can I speak to that?
Yes, Shane.
I think it's a common sort of marketing slogan for a lot of retirement villages that are co-located with a residential care service. But it's actually a pretty common complaint that we get calls about, that someone moved in understanding or assuming that when they needed to, they would be able to transition directly across to the residential care facility. But they're not keeping beds in the residential care facility empty, waiting just in case someone in the retirement village needs them.
Yeah.
So you won't be able to make that transition unless there's a space available. And often people are profoundly disappointed to realise that.
Yeah.
We find the same in Queensland, although some of the contracts will say we cannot guarantee you a place, but you will take priority. So if there is a place and somebody's not in the village, the person living in the village will have a priority for that place, but it's never guaranteed. Yeah.
William, I've got a question for you. Obviously, so much really depends on the contract of that particular village and the rules and so on that come out of that contract. Can a person negotiate on the terms of a residential village contract?
In theory, yes, as you can negotiate any contract. But in practice, operators are not very interested in negotiating because they're large organisations, they produce a standard contract, and in my experience, they're not very flexible about it. In principle, yes. Look, for minor issues, I have found, for example, that often early residents who come into a village when a village has just been built are given little freebies like we'll install the blinds, and then 3 years down the track, new residents are not getting blinds. But there can be some negotiation about relatively minor elements like furnishings in the unit. But for substantial items like price or exit fees, percentages, I think it's unlikely the operator will be flexible.
Thank you. Now it's sort of getting towards the end of today's Q&A. So if anybody has any other questions, by all means, put them forward. I'm just going to go to the panel, William, Shane, and Sharon now, just to say, are there any other topics or issues that you deal with commonly that we haven't covered today, that you feel are important for people to consider? Sharon, I might go to you first.
One that often comes up in my presentations is because you go through, the funds that they contribute to and things like that, and you often say you have to check your contract. Things will come up where someone has said, well, when my hot water service, stopped working, I thought the village would replace it because the village owns the unit, I don't own the unit. To find out that in their contract, they need to check for whether or not the village will be responsible for replacing that or whether that responsibility is placed on the resident to replace that hot water service or often an air conditioning unit on the wall. And then I've had people say, well, when I leave, can I cut the pipes and take that hot water service with me? And then it's like, well, I can't give legal advice here, but you're free to choose. But no, because they will then do an inspection of your unit to see that everything's in there. And if it's not, then they'll deduct that hot water service that's missing from your exit entitlement that you would have received. So sometimes people aren't aware of just the little nuances of how that works. That's why we say with the contract, and even when getting a lawyer, it's not just the legality of the contract, it's saying be prepared to ask the lawyer, well, what does this mean on a day-to-day basis, or what does it mean if this happens, or what? I mean, I had one person where the contract did say you could have pets, but she didn't realise that the rules went on to say, but after it dies, you can't replace it. So just they're things that even though the lawyer's looking at whether the act is in there and all this sort of thing and dispute resolution, is to know that you can ask that lawyer reviewing that to say, well, what are the village rules and how's it going to impact me on a day-to-day basis? So,
Thank you. That's very helpful. William, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Thank you, Brett. I'd like to make a couple of comments, partly because I can see a question from Roger, I think might be from RVRA, about people being moved on due to allegations as to their not causing risk to other residents and so on. Again, if you're in the village, there are laws to protect your life in the village. The operators have to have staff who behave with courtesy to you. I mean, often we get advice questions where people have a pattern where the operator's staff are very rude to them or turn up unexpectedly in their unit demanding entry to do repairs, not urgent repairs necessarily, or make, I have to say, not all operators, most operators are good, of course, but I had one case where a person had received a notice of an NCAT proceedings to evict them. And frankly, the medical evidence was flimsy, and I think it was because the operator regarded them as a troublemaker, which were able to assist them to that application wasn't successful. But management have responsibilities, and if people are unhappy about life in the village because they feel the management's not being fair, there is law to protect them, to help them in that circumstance.
That's an important real thing too, is that disputes will occur or differences of opinion will occur in a village, and outlined in Queensland legislation and also should be in the contract from the village is a dispute resolution process to resolve that. One of our goals at Caxton is that, you know, we want people to be able to have good relationships in there with management with them, and if we can resolve that through negotiation, talking it through, that's what we help them do, and that's a priority. But I agree that management often is there's no requirement in Queensland. I don't know about other states, but the management has no qualification requirement or any experience with people, senior people, or any health qualifications. So they're not always have those skills to relate to people at that stage of life. So that's something to be aware of too. And I always recommend that people walk around the village and talk to residents and see what their experience is firsthand, and go at different times of the day as well. And see, you know, you've got 200 residents and a little swimming pool, or all 200 in there at 6 a.m. in the morning doing laps. So, you know, it sounds funny, but you've got to think about things like that. So.
Yeah, so it's really practical things, isn't it? Shane, is there anything else that you would like to cover, to mention?
Yeah, just two things. So one is I absolutely agree with Sharon that talking to some of the current residents is a really good way to get an idea of the village. But as William touched on, it's also common that your contract is not going to be the same as their contract, that contracts change over time through the village. And so it's nevertheless important, just to harp on the constant refrain of this discussion, to get advice about the contract you've been offered and not assume it will be the same as someone else in the village, a friend or
I
something.
wouldn't recommend you're discussing their contract, but more the relationship they have with management or the history. Sometimes they might have been bad management, now they've got great management. So they're the sorts of things that current residents can help you with, and their experiences. So it's always good.
Absolutely. I mean, we just sometimes see people who've moved in because their friend lived there and thought they would have the same conditions and are surprised that they don't.
No, they don't.
The other thing I wanted to touch on was the way that monthly fees can be increased is important for people to understand. So in Victoria, there's a general provision that they can't increase by more than CPI, which effectively means if you're a pensioner, as most retirement village residents are, that the fees won't increase any faster than your pension does, because your pension also increases effectively by CPI. But there are statutory provisions that the monthly fees can go up by more than CPI in certain circumstances. And over the last few years, with big increases, you know, high interest rates, high inflation, we have seen above CPI increases in monthly fees, and that's created financial stress for some residents. So important to think about that as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shane. We've just got a few minutes left. So before I give some sort of closing notes, I just wanted to refer to another comment that Roger's made, which is an interesting one. They're seeing in New South Wales children putting their parents who have a cognitive disorder or dementia into a village, hoping that the village will look after them. Now, you can sort of see how this scenario might happen. Is what happens in that situation? Is there ever a cognitive assessment made before people move into a retirement village? Or what does a retirement village do, and what do the owners do if that situation kind of arises?
Retirement villages, sorry, go ahead, William.
No, just because it was New South Wales. But Shane, I welcome any comment you.
Well, I was just going to say, a retirement village is not doing any sort of cognitive assessment before you move in. They're not providing any sort of care along the lines of what a person with dementia might need. They're very likely to try and remove a person if they discover that they can't live independently. I don't have any experience of the arrangement that Roger's talking about, but if any children listening are considering doing this for their parents, it would be profoundly misguided, in my opinion.
Yeah. William, you were going to.
Yes, thank you. That's right. And although I have advised on contracts which had a provision that the incoming resident certifies they're capable of independent living. So it's something that operators are aware of. But it's a very foolish strategy, because the person's life in the village won't be a pleasant life if they don't have the ability to live independently. And the operator, at least in New South Wales, will be legally able to make application to NCAT to have them evicted. So it's a foolish short-term strategy to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I will probably wrap it up there. If anyone does have any other questions, you can definitely go to Compass.info. We have a contact form. You can also send an email to inquiry@compass.info. And just a little plug for Compass. Compass has lots and lots of information on future planning, including retirement village living, preparing enduring powers of attorney, guardianships, right through to a varied range of topics, coercive control and other topics about elder abuse. We also have a newsletter that you might like to subscribe to. Our Q&As will be running every second month. And so I wanted to thank William, Shane and Sharon for being our very first speakers on a Compass Q&A. So thank you very much for giving of your time and expertise. It's been so informative and really, really helpful. So a big thank you all. Now, contact details for each of the organisations that William, Shane and Sharon represent are on Compass. I would definitely recommend going to the tips for deciding about retirement village article that we have on the website. Now, before I wrap up today, I'd like to quickly highlight two updates from Elder Abuse Action Australia, or EAAA. Compass is a project of EAAA. Firstly, I wanted to mention that the next national conference will be in 2026. And it will be in July on the Gold Coast. The theme for that conference is Stand Up, Speak Out. And we'll continue the momentum from last year's conference and focus on bold action to address elder abuse in all its forms. And secondly, if you're not already a member of EAAA and would like to be, now is a great time to join. EAAA relies on both financial and community support to continue its vital work, from advocacy and education to national initiatives like this Q&A. Becoming a member is one way you can help drive meaningful change. For information about either the conference or membership, you can go to eAAA.org.au or email them at info@eAAA.org.au. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for all your terrific questions. And thank you from me, Brett Osmond, on behalf of Compass and EAAA. Thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon.